Um, so what the plan is to sort of one at a time go through here, see what you've got. Okay. So this is going to go a little different than the last time. This is going to require you to participate. Okay. I'm going to put. We're going to basically. I'll get them up. I'll get them playing. I'm going to put a minute on the clock, and within that minute, I'm not going to say anything. Okay. You're going to have to say things, or we're just going to sit here and quiet for a minute. Right? So what you're going to do is you're going to tell the person whose piece we're looking at, right? You're going to tell them how they could improve it. Okay, so that could include character design elements. It could include color elements. Maybe your character is running, and in that fast motion, certain colors are blurring together, and to bring that shape out, you could change the color or something like that. You can also comment on the motion, things that do not look clear in the way that the character is moving. Anything that you want to give them comments on. Here's the way to look at this, right? I just told you about some job opportunities, right? You should, as a decent human being, want other people to be successful too. Like there's not a limited amount of success. So let's say one of your friends says, hey, I'm going to apply to this job. I'm going to send them these 3 animation pieces here. Do you think like I could make this any better to increase my chances of getting this job, right? Now, if you said, looks perfect, you should send it like that, and that piece does not look good, then you're just a jerk, right? Like you're just being a bad person then, right? This is the right thing to do is to tell people how to improve. As you bring things to critique, that should be what you're looking for, right? The pat on the back of you did a great job. This is great work. Let's hang it on the refrigerator. That feels good. But if you went through this entire week and made a perfect piece, right, then you probably didn't need to take this class and you wasted that week, right? What you should be hoping for is from this critique, you gain something, you learn something, right? Did the screen just change or do something? Did something just, okay, maybe not. I thought I saw something like a window minimize or something. Anyway, so again, I'm recording this. What we're going to do is go through them one at a time. You're going to have a minute to give as much helpful feedback as you can to help the person improve, right? And then after that minute, I'll chime in on some of my comments, right? So hopefully everybody has some videos in here that we can watch. Any order you want to go in, or should I randomize this? Doesn't matter. Let's do date modified again. There we go. So Kyle, looks like you're up first. You cool with that? All right. So again, this one, I lied, it's this one. So are they all combined into one? Is that? Yeah. Okay, cool. That makes it a lot easier. So we're probably not going to look at the rig as much in here because sometimes like that just takes like some time to dig into it. We're mainly just going to look at the animations. But you'll be able to tell sometimes from the animations if the rig is, let's say, less than ideal, right? Like you'll be able to tell, like, oh wow, it looks like you were having a hard time keeping the head aligned to the chest. Maybe you should work on the rig for that or something. So those comments are perfectly fine too. So let's go ahead and open this up. Okay. So it's what now?
It was supposed to.
That says the idle, bringing the cup up, putting it back down. Okay, cool. Yeah, it makes me to re-export a little bit later than that. Okay, cool. So let's go ahead and I'll let this play through for a few more times. I like the cigarette. Anything you want to tell us about it before we get started?
Yeah, it was actually made up. The water was supposed to come out of the glass and turn into wine and then back into the glass, but I couldn't figure out how to do the color change.
Okay. I can show you some tricks for that. Actually, some of the stuff will go in. It would probably be a node editor thing. There's a way you can, if the water is on its own layer, you can make color correction over time. And so, yeah. All right, cool. So let's go ahead and get a timer started. Tell you what, I will set it to not 2 minutes. We'll set it to 1 minute and 3 seconds. Those 3 seconds give you some time to think before I get started. So as much feedback as you can on how to improve this, and go. Sorry, what? It could also like try to direct it toward Kyle. It also helps a little bit if we scrunch in a little bit, so that way you can hear it. Other comments?
The running animation, I don't know, looks a little funny because when he does his feet are both back at a certain point it looks like, instead of one being more like up. I don't know where you can like pause it to see it, but it's like right about there and there sort of thing. It looks so funny because I think also because of the smallness of it, it looks like he's tripping instead of running. So I don't know.
Nico, you had some comments?
There are a couple of times where it, like, when he's walking, it kind of looks like he's sliding a little bit. And that's just mostly, like, his body, just different placement before you put him in the next frame.
Who goes?
I think when he jumps, maybe when he starts to jump, like his feet together and then kind of like bend in the jump, and especially when he lands, kind of bend his knee a little bit after he hits the ground. That way it looks like he's like, yeah, like kind of bounces back up just a little bit, and now make it.
So, I'm okay going over the minute mark. Would it make more, or is a minute feeling a little too fast? Would you like to make it 2? Maybe on the next one we'll do 2. So let's go ahead and keep it going just a little bit here if you have other comments. Other comments to tell Kyle on this?
Seems like that frame when he's like up on the leg, so the arm is still kind of straight in there. It's like he's reaching for something.
I don't know if I want to do this before, so I feel so probably had to work on a little bit.
Yeah, so it's like throw the arms up till I get some
Maybe
momentum.
even like, I don't know, like when before he jumps, you can have like a crouching thing.
Right, yeah, it's just spring.
So in animation terms, we call that anticipation. Or you build up that anticipation for the launch off on there. So even though it's kind of a stumble forward, he's still like to get that high off the ground, he has to kind of build up that energy and push himself up. So yeah, so there's a little bit of something there. Other comments? Okay. So I'm gonna go ahead and chime in here. I feel like that was probably about 2 minutes. 2 minutes feels like that's maybe a little closer to the time we should be aiming for. So my bad, we kind of rushed that one. Any last minute comments before I jump in? Okay, so I think it's working pretty good. Like I think you'd have to chop it up a little differently if you wanted to use it for a game, but I think for a single sequence, I think they're all the parts are there. I think yeah, timing like comes on that like it slows down before the landing. I think it would read better if the timing increased the more he stumbled, right? Like that, because like then those actions are going to be less controlled and a little more flagrant.
Yeah, I was having a little bit of an issue from, because I did the walking, then I did the running, and then I did the jumping, and then I tried to put them all together, and then the only transition between the two.
I don't know.
I did it one more time, but I figured it out.
Yeah, so I think it's just going to be shifting some key frames.
I think 2 feet at that stage probably starts to run this on the way, so I was trying to figure out later.
So something else, this is just sort of a comment on the rig. I feel like for the most part, his spine stays pretty rigid. And I think if you could get some curve in the spine,
Yeah, I had a deformer on there, and I was trying to watch the video, and just for some reason was struggling to figure out how to get it. Figure out how to do his body, trying to
we can always implement that into a revision, or you could, I mean,
Right.
you can use the deformers for that, or you can do it in other ways. Like, I mean, there's nothing that says you don't have, you couldn't just frame by frame the spine to get to some different shapes. But in general, if we look at sort of the curve of the whole body, particularly as he's stumbling forward right here, his spine's kind of stiff, like straight back. I think if you were curving forward there and curving forward in his front foot, and then curve backwards as he's coming in for that landing, I think it would read a little bit more, like that contrast between the curve forward and the curve back will really get you a lot of energy in his right hand. Yeah. I think the other, like, really, like, just to me, just kind of a subtle thing, his eyes feel kind of dead. Like, I think just having.
I noticed that after I watched this, and I was like, I should have made it like,
Yeah.
Maybe he can like close his eyes as he's jumping, and then when he lands, he can open them back up.
And I think it's such an attention grabbing part of the face because it's bright, the bright light. And so some of that could also be toning down the like contrast there. So that one black dot and a big white area. You could make it just a little bit of a bigger dot, or give them some color to the eye or something. And that way it doesn't draw our attention to the fact that it's not moving. I know it's probably all in one layer right now, just to add some appeal. Feels like that party hat needs some bobble or something like that to it. That's not anything wrong with it. That's like, look for opportunities that would be kind of easy to add something there. Just breaking that party hat onto another layer, put a little bobble when he lands, and it just adds a little bit more depth to the entire head. Cool. Let's give him a hand. Okay, who's next? Maggie. Sort of broken up into 3 pieces. Okay, let's do, we're gonna add to VLC's playlist. Okay, that one. View. So I'm going to drag your walk in there a few times so we can watch it a few times in a row, and just kind of drag each of them in there a few times. Cool. All right. Let's let it play through a few times, and then. Okay, 2 minutes on the clock, as much feedback as you can to help Maggie improve this, and go.
Because there's not any means of maybe instead of, and even maybe because they notice that too, her body, the torso could kind of do a little balanced in a way. I think that might help.
I can't really tell because the shirt that all the same color, like the arms with one arm and the back arm is more.
Yeah, it's like a long
Yeah, slight color change on the back arms kind of make it a little more
Like a darker purple for the.
back arm.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
So a little bit more motion in the ponytail to kind of break up.
Yeah, you got the shape of the head if you put it on the body there as well. Face and hair, contrast.
and she gets a lot wider.
Yeah, it's supposed to be like facing like the camera, like she's like sideways or something.
Comments? Go ahead. Bring us up.
I was gonna say maybe the lines on the top of the lens for the walking jump samples, so it looks like, like there's not like any sort of samples are the same.
Last minute comments?
I feel like you could add some maybe hand movement to like the attacks, like instead of just like having a arm just go like that, maybe you could flip the hand a little bit, so it add a little emphasis to the attack. You just see it just looks like it's the all it's just a solid arm.
Yeah, if you just move the hand a little bit with the palm.
Getting that step.
So I think I'll chime in with a few notes. I think I think one of the biggest things that will help this clarity-wise is just a presentation thing. Just have it on a slightly different color background. That way your outlines and stuff don't blend in with the background as much. Because you got a lot of really stuff going on here if you look at it closely. Like in the walk cycle, you got a lot of interesting detail to how the feet are hitting the ground, and like it's kind of getting lost in some of this. And that's something to think about. Like even like for now, presenting this that's one thing. But if this were going into a video game, and she were going to be on a darker background, like she's fighting her way through a dungeon or something like that, then maybe you would have to change that in the character design to get that to pop out for gameplay. Do what?
Like gray outlines.
Yeah, like gray outlines might work, or like. I think that's interesting in terms of like what our animations are there for, because most games, particularly like 2D games, like the game would still be completely functional if the entire thing were, just solid colored spheres, right? Like Mario would still play the same if Mario was just a red dot that was the same shape as Mario. The animations give us some indication that what we're doing is working. And so a lot of it is like a feedback thing. The animations are sometimes a feedback that we're actually making an impact on the game, right? And so so that clarity of that is can be important of course the clarity is important in a film because you need it to tell the story. The story in the game is you did something and it had an effect, right? I pushed the button, the character jumped. So I think that was a long way to go to just like kind of think of the way the final thing is going to be presented to the audience, and in this case, just dulling down the background I think would help. I think in the jump animation, you remember when we looked at the function editor and like it feels right now that the up and down motion is still two straight lines, right? And I think it needs to kind of arc in to the top, like ease in at the top of that jump and ease out of the top of that jump, but still be sharp on the other end. So sort of like a bell curve shape. And then it's going to look like she has some hang time before she comes back down. Right now it kind of feels like pop, pop, I think that'll go a long way in making that one feel really stuff. I like the overlapping action comments. I also kind of agree that like the difference from the side view to the front view feels a little bit like of a drastic change. So maybe in the front view, maybe just narrow her a little bit, or in the side view, widen her torso just a little bit. So I don't know. It's just an idea. Sort of like we were talking about with Kyle, somebody mentioned the bobbling hair or something like that. I think that's another way that's like just a little bit of motion there will go a long way into breaking this up and making it feel like it's multi-layered. So, nice. All right, cool. Let's give her a hand. All right. Megan. think this will play in the loop now. Yeah. Cool. 2 minutes on the clock, as much feedback as you can to help her improve it. And I don't know if you noticed this, I'm kind of turning the camera around a little bit because the microphone is on that. That way they can go back and watch this video later and hear your notes as well. So just giving you a heads up, if you're camera shy. Sorry. 2 minutes on the clock and go.
When it's walking and sometimes when it's jumping like at the end of the jump, like the back, it kind of turns to blue in the background. So maybe extending his leg a little bit behind the shirt might help clear that up so it doesn't have a gap where it connects the body.
Yeah, you're talking about that like, little blue gap in the,
Yeah.
the back? Yeah. Is that what that is? It needs a little more filling.
Sometimes use it metaphorically for being empty inside.
This pocket is
It's just like a personal thing, but like I think it'd be really cool like when he jumps, made his like hair like flip out of his face or something. That'd be like really funny.
Is the hair on a separate layer?
Yeah.
Oh, I do that just a little deformer, or even just a few frames.
This is just the character design thing, but every time I look at him, I know that's his nose, but to me it just looks like a tiny mouth, just the way that it's drawn. Yeah, so maybe if it was like maybe like upturned, then that would be different. Or I don't know.
His eye just kind of remains the same. It's pretty fluid though.
Cool. So I think this is interesting. Anybody, any last minute comments on this before I chime in? I think this is pretty interesting because we get to see it, especially in these cycle animations, that you watch it the first time, does it read? Like, do you understand it? And then if we sit and stare at it forever, we'll start to find other things, and those things are definitely like worth pointing out and worth implementing. But I think like for me, I kind of go off of two gut reactions. Like, does it read the first time through? And I think for the most part it does pretty well. Kind of wish on the idol there was a little bit more overlapping action. It kind of feels like it's kind of hitting all together. So I love the overlapping action of the head on the band of the jump. So I think maybe we can build just a little bit more of that into the idol with a little more loose. Obviously, the little notes that people have pointed out, like the back of the pocket, the eye blink and stuff like that. For some reason, I don't have the nose mouth thing. Like, I didn't have an issue with that. Like, I kind of read it as like a nose and his mouth was just kind of missing. But like, that's kind of I can see that. Like, and if enough people are reading it that way, it's worth considering. Like, do you just imply a mouth there, or just a subtle shade or something? It's kind of different. There'll be different animations or illustration style than we're going for, but kind of has a 90s brat punk like design to it. This feels like something on an MXPX album cover. So like, for that, I kind of I read it okay. So, but I think I can tell the work that you've done in the function editor. And I think that it's particularly in the walk, like the smoothness to the walk. I think it's paying off pretty well. Feels like maybe there's a hitch here and there, so it might not hurt to like with fresh eyes and go through all the function editor again and see if there's any little things that are hitting sharp. Toon Boom doesn't have the cycle option that is in Maya, so you kind of have to imagine that. Like, and it feels like there's a chance in the walk, maybe your tangents are flattening out at the beginning and the end on like the head, and instead, like if it's coming down at the beginning and coming, if it's going down at the ending and down at the beginning, then you need to break those and kind of imagine what the continuation of that curve would be to get it to loop. But,
I'd be more impressed or disappointed if I said I didn't open the function editor.
interesting. Both. Really? That's cool. So I'm guessing that means there's a lot more keyframes in here. Okay, so, and that's fine. 2D is manageable that way. I mean, in fact, like Flash's, or I guess it's Animate now, Adobe Animate's equivalent to the function editor is like beating two rocks together. Like it is very, like, does not have the controls you would want it to have. And so I think a lot of people in 2D animation do just kind of brute force it. Like they just use the curves and everything like that. I think some of those little bitty tiny hitches on the head, you could get that a little smoother with a quick pass to it, and it would be a really quick pass. That's kind of the cool thing about it, is that it is not the time investment that the graph editor is in Maya. So, yeah, cool. I would be interested. This is a character design idea. I would be interested to see what would happen if there was a little bit more variety in his line weight, like on the design. Like everything is kind of the same thickness, and so that means certain lines are kind of pulling my attention a little more than I think is necessary. So like the little wrinkle at the bottom of his shirt is just as predominant as the line that makes up his nose. And like, does that make sense? So like if those were a little varied in spots, one of the cool things about the rigged version of this is all that means you have to do is change a single drawing and it updates it on all the animations. It's worth testing that out and see. Maybe get a little bit of tapering on the end of some of those lines, like in the pant leg. Like if that narrows as it gets closer to that point, you may get a little bit of a, that may feel a little bit more like a natural fold. Just play with that, see if it makes, if it's a good change, or if, you know, I'm talking out my butt and you need to just leave it like it is. Cool. Any other last minute comments? Cool. Let's give her a hand. All right. Up next is Shannon. Okay, so we'll start with hi. Okay. Let's play it a few times. All right. 2 minutes on the clock, as much feedback as you can to help Shannon improve this. And go. The lines jump around. Oh, on the run? Oh.
I feel like she's a little stiff when she runs. If you look at her arm that we see closer to us, kind of goes that, I guess that's how I see it, I guess. doing different positions when she was running and walking. Her right hand's like this, and her left hand is like so. She's like,
Yeah.
it's this weird motion.
Particularly in the run, it's like she's like scooping.
They could like turn into fists.
It's kind of like she's almost trying to do this crocodile clap
I
thing.
noticed that, but it was too long.
Yeah. So, any last minute comments on this one?
I like that you made her blink. It's pretty cool.
The what?
I like that she made her blink. It looks really good.
Yeah,
It
it's
adds a lot to
it's
it.
really subtle, but like very nice. Like it's kind of like adding just a little bit of that motion here and there allows us to not allows the stillness of certain areas to not draw our eye, right? And I think just that one little blink brings her whole face to life in that animation, even when it's really like kind of subtle. I think that we're seeing a little bit of that in the hand, the opposite of that in the hand, right? That the hand feels like it's kind of always in that same shape. And I think that that's something you could play around with. Like, what if you just had like 3 different hand drawings and you sort of switched in and out? I assume the hand is on a slightly different layer.
Yeah.
And you could have one where it is cupped up, like maybe as her hand is coming back, that is how it drags behind. But maybe as it's dragging forward, it's the other way and in a slightly different pose. And just swapping out those drawings, I think, would help a little bit. I think the hair moving all together, hair is really hard to get to move. So like it's a challenge. And it doesn't bother me as much in the front, but I feel like it does need a little bit more wave to it in the motion in the back. And something that really like maybe I'm misinterpreting what's happening here, but the shape of the shirt, like the top, always sort of stays the same, right? And it feels like it's kind of open on the bottom a little bit. And so my thinking is, as she would go up and down, you would maybe get a little bit of a change in the curved shape, right? It's like if you drop a napkin, how the ends kind of bend back as they flutter down a piece of paper. Like it feels like on the down motion, you're sort of squishing it up and down. Maybe just have that tip flare out just a little bit as it comes down. And I think a little bit of something like that would loosen up that whole piece, that whole garment as well, and it would feel more like fabric. And so I think the hair and the fabric are both in those same realms. You have to figure out little tricks to not have to redraw every frame and still get it to feel like it's squishing a little bit or flapping a little bit. The walk looks really very solid to me. Got some nice weight to the steps. I think the same thing I mentioned with Kyle's, like the run, where her torso is very up and down. And I think even if you just leaned her torso in a little bit, I don't know how it's broken up. You could also do a deformer to curve it in a little bit, but you may like change the silhouette in a way you don't want to. So even if you just leaned her into that run a little bit, I think that would help. And another little thing to me, very small stuff, like when we talk about the hands feeling stiff, to me I kind of like, the shoes are so, they stand out so much, like they're a different color, they're very big. I really want to see just a little bit of bend in that toe or something on some of that toe job. All these are really small things because to me actually this is a pretty good piece. Like, these are little things you can do to add to it to loosen it up just a little bit more. Any other last minute notes? That's all right. Okay. I know we're about halfway through. I wanted to just kind of stop for a minute and say, is this being helpful? Do you feel like you're getting notes that you're able to use from this? Take the notes from other people's stuff too. It's one of the reasons I like recording these feedback videos all together, is that if you listen to other people's feedback and say, can I apply that to mine as well? That's good. If at any point in any critique for my class or any other person who ever critiques you, if people talk and you walk away from that being like, I still don't know what it is I need to do, like that, you need to make sure that as you leave, you have sort of an idea of what would make it better, right? So if in these critiques, if you are still unclear, you still need more clarification, like make us give that to you, right? Like be like, hold on. So more bounce on the step, or like you know, clarify that. So that is kind of I've seen that bite people in the professional setting. Like they listen to the critique, but they don't ask questions, and then they bring it back and show it again, and the boss is like, "Well, you're not listening." Yeah, I just didn't understand. It's like, then you didn't use the most of that week. So like yeah, any feedback you need, like that's the other end of this. This should be a give and take. So Brent, let's start with run. Alright, cool. Before we get started, do you want to tell us a little bit about the character?
So I kind of based it off of one of the animations that I did for principal's class, where I had an egg-shaped character running along the wall and falling off.
Okay, so this is like a crack in the.
It's basically a dent. It didn't crack, but it's basically a dent.
Oh, it did. Interestingly, Gumby, has that like big, like awkward shaped head. It's because the guy who created Gumby, his dad had this giant knot on the side of his head. And if you see pictures of it, like it's like.
I need to see it.
Oh, it's like, is that real? Did somebody Photoshop that? Like it's big. And he's like, I'm just gonna make a cartoon character that looks like my dad.
I'm literally Googling Gumby's dad. I know it's not his dad.
Yeah, but it's like, yeah, the guy, yeah. See, I saw it in a documentary once. I was like, whoa. Anyway.
Oh no, it actually showed me Gumby's dad. I need to
oh yeah,
the creator of Gumby's.
he's a good guy too. Okay, cool. So 2 minutes on the clock, as much feedback as you can to help Brent improve this, and go.
I kind of want to see him jump a little higher.
Yeah, I made it for like when you showed construct game. I was like, in the construct game, he jumps going to move the way the thing is. So I just kind of left on, just made the.
Yeah. I didn't go into that too much. Yeah, because construct will actually, you can change the height of the jump in there. So I can see where you're going for it. I think presentation-wise, it's nice to be able to show how high you would want it to go, and then you would have the version you put in the game where he doesn't really go up off the ground. Yeah, so instead of just like open and then close, like a breakdown in there where you can see it closing.
I'm not gonna lie, when I saw the curve in that egg-shaped character, because it's against the dark background, I kind of thought it was hair at first. It's like it has some sort of Elvis like hairy, but I can see the curve in the head now, and when it comes to your jump, one thing I do like that I've seen people forget before is when he lands, he bends his knees. Because I've seen a lot of times
So I'll go ahead and chime in. Obviously, the little things that like the arm and stuff. I think you're right. Like the face, particularly in this character, like he doesn't have a lot of body parts, right? He has like an arm, a leg, some legs, some feet, but he doesn't have like a torso or like hair like some of the other characters do. So I think you did a good job at like trying to bring what you have in the character to life. I think later versions of it, like you could, like if the mouth is on a different layer, just sort of squashing the mouth a little bit makes it feel a little bit like maybe the bottom lip is going up and down, or a little bit of motions like that. All those little things that you can add in there. I think what I would kind of try to do, especially in the idol, is make them not all hit at the same time. Right now, like the eyebrows hit, like are kind of doing the opposite of what the arms are doing at the same exact time. If they were just offset by a frame or two, it would feel much more loose. I think the run forward, like one of the cool things about 2D is like we can break this pretty easily for our needs, right? And right now, as he's running, his hips are staying in the same point on the egg shape at all times, right? But if you think about it, when we run, like when I throw my right leg forward, I kind of twist my hips, right, and like rotate my hips forward. Well, you can't rotate this character's hips, but if you change the point of where they're connecting and move like that back leg a little further forward when that leg is forward, and vice versa, you're going to get that implied hip twist from it. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So I'm going to play around with that just a little bit more, and I'll be curious to see how this looks in game. I didn't go into this too much because, like, this is a good jump that you would need for like a movie or something like that. Like he's got the anticipation, you have to follow through. In a game, as soon as you hit the jump button, your character is usually up in the air. And so a lot of times for the game jump animation, if you're doing it for a game, it's just more of like an idle in the air. And you can have a little bit of like a push off at the beginning and a landing at the end, but it's more of like, is your character like flailing through the air as they're jumping? And that way, if your character jumps off a really small ledge, you play that animation, or if they jump off of a giant tower, it's always playing that animation as they fall. So like, just functionally, like if you're wanting to put this into a game, we'd probably tinker with that jump a little bit to make it work in the engine. The cool thing is it's very easy to test that, right? You just pick that out, put it in the game engine, and then you get to see how it functions there, and you can bounce back and forth. And so that's one of the things that that is kind of neat about this. Anybody plan on putting theirs in a game? No? All right. But that's cool. I do think that there are probably opportunities that some of you will be in like a game class later or something like that. And there's opportunities for that hopefully this will pay off in. So, yeah, cool. Let's give my hand. All right. Robert. Robert Raw. I don't know. I'm easily.
Silence soon comes. And now I will destroy you. Silence soon comes. And now I will destroy you. Silence soon comes. And now I will destroy you.
What's the voice saying?
I don't know. I'll let you all listen to it later more closely. I'm not sure I want to. Okay, So 2 minutes on the clock, as much feedback as you can to help him improve it, and go.
I think your walk cycle is pretty good, but I feel when he walks, one leg steps faster than the other. And so he goes really quick there, then slow, and then quick and then slow. I guess.
What was that? So like the bottom of the coat's attached to sugar. So is that frame by frame you're doing?
Float?
Yeah.
The hand for the lens stand is also frame by frame. I don't really know how to make it like smoother, so I tried to like get them to a point where they're like consistent, but it just feels really jittery.
I can give you some pointers in there, and I'll let people keep commenting. So, other comments? Say one more time. I kind of read that as like wind, right? Like it's like reacting to wind. But I do think it's interesting, like if you get that much movement in it, I'm chiming in too much. But if you have that much movement in it when the character's moving forward, maybe rotate it back so it's like it's dragging a little bit. Other comments? Once, twice. All right, I'll hop in. So I think it's actually looking pretty good. I think I agree with the comment of the foot timing on the walk. Feels a little off to me. So just like look at the frame count. That's just shifting some stuff on the feet. I think you got some really cool poses in here, and I think you're doing something that I didn't see coming, which is you're like showing the characters back to us a little bit.
Trying to do like 3/4 view.
Yeah, but it's neat. Like it's very like there's something in that is very stylistic. Not stylistic. It tells us something about the character, right? And I think it's very. It makes it gives it a slightly different like bravado to the characters, like personality, than if they would have been open to you. It's very protected, right? It's very defensive.
It reminds me of Shadow the Hedgehog.
Yeah.
Like a mix of Shadow the Hedgehog and Kylo Ren. That is what that is. Which is maximum Edgelord. So perfect.
So I think that you could use a little bit more overlapping action in a few things. Like when the gun fires, like the head kind of goes back at the same time. And I think if the head went back like a frame later, it's going to feel like it's like a reaction to the jolt of the arm, right? Like it's going to feel like the gun drives the arm back, and then the head responds. So I think I'd play around with the offset just a little bit in some of that. I think the other little thing I would consider is like what we were talking about with the legs, like moving where the hip is connected. I think you could do some of that with the shoulders too, on that walk right there. So move like the closest shoulder back just a little bit forward, and you're going to get that implied clavicle twist.
I tried to do that, but then I realized since I designed that character in 3/4 view, if I moved it a little forward, it would look really weird. And also the part where he has, it's like I put the shoulder right there, and then on the body I have a cut opening right there. So
Yeah.
if you move it too forward, you'll have sharp points.
Yeah. So there's there's a little bit of like, and it doesn't have to be much either though. Like you may be able to nudge it really small amounts, and you're not going to notice it, but you would feel what feels like a little bit more depth in there, right? It's that like if you know when you have like this like parallax, we're going to talk about that a little bit more today. That just having them move at like slightly different times makes one feel further away from the camera than another one, or than the other one. So I think the question you had about the flapping of the cape, I actually think that there's sections of that looks really good. There's other parts where it feels like it's repeating a little too much. But really what I would do is like, so let's say you draw like a sideways S shape, right? If you were to draw the inverted version of that, like the flipped version where the S is going the other way, and say like give yourself 5 frames to just draw every frame of how that would transition from A to B, right, and then back to A. And then if you had that image sequence, you could kind of get, hopefully you would get like a repeating pattern that would feel like a wave, right? I could show you like on the screen in a little bit if we do, just to get some ideas. But some of that stuff like that, like you almost have to frame by frame it. Explosions are another one that's like that, like because an explosion may just happen over like 7 frames or something, and you just have to draw each frame one after the other and say, okay, this cloud of smoke breaks into 2 smaller clouds of smoke and dissipates a little bit, and you just have to draw every one of them. Like, how does it get from A to B? I like the attempt of it though, because like it's really like. It has a feel that is very common, I think, in anime, which is like a very stoic, still character with one element that is just moving, right? And part of what we're going to be talking about today is that, you know, like, it's not uncommon to just see what appears to be a drawing with a cape, and that cape is just flapping, but nothing else is moving. Like it really like. That extra movement in the cape exaggerates the keep using the word stoic, but that like bravado of like just standing really still and confident that the rest of the character has. So I like the element of it. I think it just needs a touch like clean up to feel a little bit more fluid, but it's pretty close. Like it's closer than you might think. I think there's just 1 or 2 drawings that are slightly off. Is this your own design? Like your own character? It's got some nice forms that kind of pop out and are very like clear. So like even though like the arm isn't, it kind of hides in the torso a little bit, like it's still very clear where everything's at. Let's come on. Okay. Stephanie.
This is a hairy testicle. I just know that it is.
Do what?
It's a hairy testicle with eyes and legs. I just know that it is.
He's a creepy guy, but he's hilarious.
Okay, 10 minutes on the clock. As much feedback as you can. So Stephanie, approve it. And go.
On your walk cycle, it seems like your feet, when they kick forward, they don't go any farther forward. They just go back to where they would be standing position-wise. Just
So-
kicking backwards.
So kick them a little bit further in front of them.
Yeah.
You could definitely have your own jump cycle, like that just needs to be put down, but it looks like it's just barely.
So one more squash on that anticipation.
I feel like I'm also in the jump cycle when he's going to jump, how he does bend beforehand, but it looks like his feet either just kind of pick up in the back, like, I jump, you lean a little bit, and it's kind of like a push rather than just a goes up and your legs lift.
So does it feel a little bit more like the character should be jumping forward with that kind of
Like,
kick
not
backwards?
necessarily forward, but more his legs are bending a lot back when he jumps. That's it. Like right there, if you can see what I'm talking about.
I think you should let the birds move up a little bit.
Yeah.
Other comments?
And you have to look eyeballs up and you can stop the eyes on it, so that's good.
Oh yeah. They're separate. I think this one could be really interesting later to give a blink animation to because it's so like it's like such a huge feature. You would almost have to frame by frame that. Other comments? Okay. Last chance. Comments? Cool. Actually, yeah, I think a lot of those comments were pretty good. A couple of other things I think that you can do to loosen it up a little bit is like the feet always stay in the same shape, and so like when the character's pushing off behind them, then like maybe bending the toe a little bit or something like that, just to get a little deformation in the foot. I think would keep it from feeling very. Right now it feels a little too puppety, and I think that would help add a little bit of that. I'll be interested to see that walk moving forward. It feels like it needs a little bit more like bounce to it for weight. Kind of feels like the character is being suspended in the air and the feet are just kind of kicking underneath them. And so maybe a little bit more up and down in the hips might help that. You have a lot of depth in this drawing, right? Like there's like that. The character's left eye is significantly smaller than the right eye, and it's implied that that's a foreshortening thing. Like that it's because it's a little further away, it's a little smaller. And I think that there's maybe a rigging. It may not work with the current rig, but something to consider is there's a way to like. If that back eye just moved forward a little bit and then back a little bit, it would give the impression that the head is turning. Just because of the, like right now my eyes are far apart, but the more I turn, from your perspective, the closer they'll get together, right? And I think it would imply that depth that you already have built into the drawing. It would imply that a little bit more in the motion. That's not necessarily something wrong with it. That's a way to sort of add to it, to plus it. That's what they will use that frame.
I actually just drew that eye smaller because I wanted it smaller.
Okay, so it's not necessarily I read it as being a little bit further away and like we're just looking at an extremely foreshortened camera. Still worth like playing with a little bit just to do a little bit of that as an extra element. The lip shape and the nose shape are very dynamic and they kind of flare out. And so I kind of want to see those change just a little bit at parts, particularly in the really like heavy action parts. Like jump up in the air, maybe the nose would bend just a little bit and point down or something like that. So that's something to like, consider adding in a little bit later. Overall, though, I think it's working okay. But yeah, like it feels like it needs something in the eyes because they're so big, right? And so like, he's a scrappy fellow. Cool. Any last minute comments on any of this?
I just noticed you spell idol.
How to spell it?
Idol. We're worshiping them.
I'm worshiping.
Sometimes I regret documenting the past. All right, cool. Yeah, let's see what happens. Okay. Tracy. I'm going to, this one kind of loops a little bit. Let me get a couple of these in here so we can see it play a few times. Jump cycle. Might have been overkill, but cool. 2 minutes on the clock, as much feedback as you can to help Tracy improve it. And go.
I noticed the arms seems like it's just like one limb, really one limb. Maybe there's like a little bend to it. Maybe it has this is like you could have like bend in here towards the jump.
I agree with that.
I feel like in the jump, it almost seems like it's gonna be a flip, but it's not.
How it rotates
Yeah.
back.
Like so very close. I mean, the tail would, in physics. Well, no, actually, since the tail kind of like goes underneath it, it just feels like a flip is going to happen. Whereas maybe if this is completely physical of this, the anatomy of this creature that doesn't exist. But like, if it were just gonna come back down, I feel like the tail would balance it out to not go underneath it and to probably just like stay out. Unless it does a full flip, then that would be okay too.
There's a lot of movement with the body. I kind of feel like the neck and the body are kind of stiff.
Because there's so much movement everywhere else, it's like you're kind of, your eyes kind of catching the parts that. Comments? Once. All right. So I'm going to kind of agree. I think the notes that kind of struck me the most that I agree with is that the arms feel kind of locked at the shoulder. I think getting some bend to that, where like maybe as the arm goes forward, it ends like a little more bent, so it kind of curves at the end, or at least drags as it's going backwards and forward. I think that would really loosen up that section of the body. I think just adding that by itself may also like make the sort of like the chest doesn't move very much. Not that it necessarily needs to. But again, it's like the tail's moving a lot. It feels like the hips and the feet are moving a lot. The head's moving a lot. And so when that part isn't moving as much, it kind of catches our eye. So I think you can go either way. I think you maybe tone down just a little bit of the motion in some of the other parts. Or you could, if you add that to the arms, I think that maybe it will disguise the chest not moving as much. Or won't be as noticeable. I mean, you had that deformer in the neck, so maybe it would already like kind of just exaggerate that a little bit more. I really like, it feels like a bunny hop forward. And I think that looks like the feet like look really good on that. I kind of who was it that said about that? It looks like it's going to do a backflip. It's interesting because it looks like it's going to do a backflip because that tail goes under, and then, but it looks like it's jumping forward also.
Yeah, it does.
So it's like there's something about the weight there that's happening midair. It looks like your character's leaning back, and since it's jumping forward, would land on its back as it comes down, but somehow miraculously starts rotating back forward in midair. And so I think you got to kind of combat that one way or the other. My thinking, just try this. Instead of having the tail curl under when it goes up, have it curl back more and then like what sometimes creatures with big tails will do is they'll use that as sort of a momentum, like in the same way that
Like cats.
yeah, like the same way like when you're falling over, you wave your arm like this to try to like catch. I don't know how often you all fall over. I fall over a lot of times, but you do like this and it's like really just trying to throw some momentum that way to get you back in balance. I think the tail could do something like that. Check out like a squirrel tail. Like they do kind of tuck under when they go up, but then they flip it back up. And so like it's something in that just sort of you can play with it to fix that. Yeah, my biggest thing is I feel like the arm and the hand is a little stiff, and you get a lot of that movement on the ear, but it feels like it's a rotation in these more still animations. It feels like there's more deformation to it on the jump, but maybe that's implied because of how quick it's moving. So maybe you get like a little bit more curling to that. Are the feet bending on the jump? I think when you have feet that big, like you expect a lot of like this like flop to them. So you maybe play around with adding just a little bit more of that. All these are really subtle things though. Overall, I think this is looking pretty solid. There's just some things to tweak around. So this, any story behind the character design on this? When I was a kid, there was a toy that came out called Teddy Ruxpin. You guys know Teddy Ruxpin? It was pretty much just a cassette player inside of a teddy bear, and its jaw would move up and down. But Teddy Ruxpin and my sister had one, so like I listened to that, and then occasionally would put like AC/DC tapes in it and let Teddy Ruxpin sing AC/DC. But the story, there was another character in there. It has a very similar like style, not similar design. It's more of like a giant ogre character, but it's in a very similar like illustrative style and character style. So check out some of the old Teddy Ruxpin stuff. I just think it's interestingly like seems like it's in a similar world. So, cool. Yeah, let's get around. All right. Who is next? Julia. Unisloth. Let these play a few more times. All right. 2 minutes on the clock, as much feedback as you can to help Julia improve this, and go.
I really love the box like the upper part of the chest makes it a little bit too much jiggle. Great. Good to be doing it. It seems like on like the front side of your shoulder, like you have the shoulders rotating, but like the upper chest is just like stiff.
Yeah. Yeah, I noticed that something I don't want to change in the middle between going from the walking to the running cycle, but I could move the chest out, the chest part out of that, so I don't know what and which, but you can see the difference if I should on the other.
Other comments? squash it in the middle. So I think this is interesting because sometimes this happens like that, like you have a hard time finding feedback to give, right? And that could be for a couple reasons. One, it could be that you literally just can't spot anything that you think would improve it, or sometimes it's like you see something, you're not exactly sure what it is, but you can't put it into words, right? So that's okay. Like, that's one of the reasons we do feedbacks or critiques like this is so you can learn how to communicate that. Because I've had bosses before who were unable to explain to me how to make it better. They would just say, make it better. And I'm like that doesn't help, right? So I think that this is a good exercise to try to find ways of putting that into words. I'll go ahead and chime in just to give you my notes. I do think there's a couple things, but overall, I think that this is looking pretty good. Like, all of this stuff that I'm seeing isn't really things that are messed up. It's more like things you can try to see if it improves it even more. So one of them is like on the jump, the leg that is closest to us is almost on top of the leg that is furthest away. And so maybe just offset those a little bit just so we get a little bit more depth in that. Sort of the same with the arms, like they're kind of perfectly to the side. I think you get a little bit more depth in that would help. I think on the run, the character needs to sort of pop up in the air a little bit more. So if we think of a run, it is kind of like this like bound, like you're kind of, it's a repetitive jump forward kind of. And so right now the hips kind of stay about the same height. I think if you raise them up a little bit more on the up part of that would help. And then my last note, particularly on the run, I saw a little bit of thing on the walk as well. Like you have the head bobbing up and down. It feels like that head hits, like you have your down pose, your character hits your contact, and then they go down, and that's the lowest point of the hips. It feels like the character's head's hitting its lowest point at that point too. And if it just hit that one frame later, it would feel like that bobble of the head was a result of the hips hitting that low point. It would be like it's a reaction, right? And so you can offset that just a little bit. I think look for places to break up when we say overlapping action, basically it just means not everything happens at the same time, right? And so finding places where you can be like, oh, I can have that happen one frame later, and it would feel like a reaction, or I can have that happen one frame earlier, and it can feel like the reason the character's going up in the air is the arms go first, right, or something like that. So I feel like that those are places to look for overlapping action. I do think the arms need to do a little bit of something up in the air. And it could be that they just kind of tuck up like this. And if so, that could be something that happens first, right? Like if the character squashes and then he tucks up the air to kind of like throw himself up into the air, right? Or herself. But overall, I think it's actually looking pretty good. Take a little bit of extra stuff in the face. You did a little bit of eye movement. I think that would really like bring, or maybe even a little bit of mouth movement. I think that would bring the face to life a little bit more. Yeah. Overall, it's something really solid. Creature of your own design.
Yeah. I didn't know what to create at first. I was doing running designs, and for some reason I was stuck on a unicorn or something. I was like, what can I do that's unexpected?
I am like right in the middle of a narwhal phase that is driving my wife nuts. Like she's just like, yes, Greg, I know narwhals. I'm like, but they're so cool.
I know
So,
normal.
we went to an aquarium and like they had one. And I was like, it's a thing, and she's like, that's not a real thing. And I'm like, it's a thing.
They're unicorn whales.
I had to Google it to prove it. But anyway, so I'm pro unicorn. I'm pro anything corn, including fish of corn, narwhal.
Fish are corn.
So it's cool.
Where the heck? What aquarium was this?
Oh, there was. It wasn't really a narwhal. Oh, like if it was like a real one, it was like in the gift shop. They had like a little stuffed narwhal.
You disappoint me.
I know. It'd be like field trip to the narwhals. Let's go. All right, cool. Well, let's enjoy it. All right. I'm sorry. I got your hopes up
You
about the
did. I
narwhals.
was like, are you kidding me? There's an aquarium with narwhals.
So my wife. Oh, what?
The white-eared narwhal is called fishicorns.
Fishicorns. I don't know.
I mean,
Is there a whale?
Whalicorns.
it's like a whale
The history has a long history of naming things inaccurately. So the other day, my wife is a huge Strawberry Shortcake fan, like the character and the food, but mainly the character. And I was saying something, and I was like comparing it to something, and I was like, it would be like if I told you that there was like a Strawberry Shortcake convention happening next weekend, in Boone's Creek, and she was like, and I was like, but it's not. Like, don't. She's like, is there a such thing as a Strawberry Shortcake convention? And then when we looked it up, there was, but it was in 2013, and they haven't had another one since then. And now she's really disappointed. And so I feel like I just narwhaled you in that same way. So I apologize. Strawberry Shortcake. Okay, cool. So, Nico, your last. Did anybody slip one in there without me noticing? Okay. So if I manage to skip over anybody, let me know. But we'll go ahead and wrap it up with Nico. Let's get this. Jump. My wife also likes penguins. So I bring up my wife a lot. I'm not gonna notice that.
You love
I'm a fan. Dude,
I'm a fan.
I'm a fan. I'm Team Greg's wife. So cool. Let's play a few times. And all right. So 2 minutes on the clock. As much feedback as you can on how to improve this, and go.
I'm a little off put by the feet. The way they're designed, it kind of looks like the feet, the ends, the bottom of the feet, kind of look like they're facing forward, I guess. So it kind of looks like he's walking like on a glass pane right in front of us, I guess, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Sometimes we're probably facing the same thing things that come to kill us, and like when it's apparently like walking parallel to us, like we're still the same feet shape, I expect them to like turn.
I'll chime in on that one. Other comments?
Honestly, when you have it like that flat thing, honestly reminded me of flat penguin speak Club Penguin.
Yes. That was a little bit of an influence. Bring back Little Penguin. But not Little Penguin Island.
Okay.
Does your wife like Little Penguin? Oh.
So I have to introduce this to her. So apparently-
Real kid would duke it out at the dojo.
Other comments? Things to improve?
It just feels like it's staring into my soul.
I mean, if you were that cute little tiny little penguin, you stare into people so.
Exactly. Who wants to do that?
I feel like just because you said that, you need to take that little white belly of the penguin and put other purple spots in it and design to make it look like a skull.
So, last minute comments on this? So, I'm going to chime in on here because you have some neat stuff happening here that what I'm getting ready to show you all today, like, you could do some neat things with this because your character is very symmetrical, right? Like, the penguin, like, the only thing that really tells us the penguin is facing forward is that the facial features are in the middle and that white thing is in the middle, right? But if you just push that white thing, white spot area over to the other side, then it would look like the character had turned to its side. And if the face was still facing you, then it would just look like it's looking over its shoulder at you, right? So you have a design here that could very easily, like you could in just a few minutes do like a full 360-degree animation with this character, right? And so I'll show you some tricks today that you may in hindsight see some ideas that you could do with that to get some depth to it. Because I think that's when the feet go behind the character on that sideways walk, it kind of feels like a drunken stagger to the sides, like, oh, oh. Like it kind of has that feel to it. And so like I think that there's something to play around with in there. There's not like a one thing like check that off the list and it fixes it. I don't necessarily think it's broken. I think it feels like you're making those stylistic decisions right now, but having those tools like in your toolbox would maybe allow you to tweak that a little bit. So on the walk, like pushing that white thing to the side, I think would help a little bit. My first thought is that it always stays that round shape, and particularly in that wobble from side to side, I kind of want to see it warp a little bit. And so I don't know if you would want to put a whole deformer in there or just an extra drawing to get like a little bit of a curve or a lean in that shape or something like that. I think they could
very, very subtly there. I do the way that I can probably fix it. I do think I know. Like I did like very minimal deformities, so I can definitely.
Yeah, push it a little bit more. I think that there's a project that I'm taking it out as a project, but I will probably still leave in part of the lecture to it about what I call a 2.5D turn. Like it's a full like 360-degree character turn, and you can kind of fake that just by warping some stuff. And I think that there's a lot coming out of that you might find beneficial in this. But I think that that's one of the cool things about this. Is like sometimes in character design, one of the things you're designing for is the use, right? And that simple shape of this character gives us a lot of reuse, whereas like something that is very definitively the front and back, like it's kind of hard to make your character turn then, right? So I like the character design a lot, and I think it's very, very cute. So, have y'all watched? There's a documentary on Netflix called a Penguin Spy or something like that. I don't know what it's called, but it's like it was a BBC documentary where basically they made little like robot versions of penguins that had cameras in them. Like this is the BBC like taxpayers' money at work here. And then they like sent them into the midst of the penguins. And so like you get this up close, like the penguin is like, it's like a little robot, like radio controlled penguin driving around filming these penguins up close. It's like we've infiltrated the penguin population and they're not aware. It is the funnest thing. I watch it with a group of friends, but it is hilarious. Anyway, it's not trying to be hilarious, but it is hilarious.
I love it already.
Oh, it's so good. Penguins are a lot of fun. So I like the design and there are a lot of people who have tried to simplify penguins to their cutest elements, and I think it's almost like a fun exercise. Like how can you simplify a penguin even more and still make it
Until it's just a pixel.
The pixel, yeah, it's like the penguin pixel. All right, that's gonna go ahead. Okay, one more thing we're going to talk about in terms of critique. First, I think these are turning out good. I definitely see progress from last week to this week. I think part of it is just like you're not fighting with the tool as much, and you're probably understanding it a little bit more. You may not be loving the rigging part of it. That's okay. So I spent a little bit of time last class period editing together what we had from Project 1 into a full piece. All right, so let's do dance edit. So In the process of doing this, I realized that we missed some of the directions on how to turn it in. So there was probably about half of them were all either I didn't have an image sequence with an alpha channel to pull from. And so I made two different versions. I made one that is just like, let's watch it and see kind of what I was aiming at of being able to compile this together into one video. And then I made another one where I just made you some notes on things to improve, right? The things that are necessary to make it function as a full video, right? So let's watch it, just so you get an idea of what I was kind of thinking. I still haven't implemented any of my stuff in there, and I have a feeling some of your changes will change it a little bit as well. There was also some people who forgot to put a version in there, so like it's gonna change around a little bit, but this is a good first pass to see what we're going for. So, right. So that's where the credits will fit in. So obviously a little bit of tweaking to it. I think once we get a few more pieces in there, it'll shorten some of the clips down a little bit and have a little bit more of a pace to it. But you see this, like, this is not necessarily has to be the final color. We just have this solid background color in here. That's why I needed the PNG sequence, right? Is because then I could extract the background. A couple people had like a target sequence. Some people had a PNG sequence, but for some reason the alpha channel still wasn't there. So it makes me think you exported PNG instead of PNG4. And then some people had a video clip in there. I just edited it together so you can see what it would be like. But the idea is that we had all of those as PNGs. They could all be on the same background, and that background could literally be like spiraling lights or whatever we wanted to put into this. So I can sort of layer this together and, like, with the right images, turn it into a full thing. Is this something you want to even continue to proceed with? Does this seem like a fun thing to have as a final piece? Because I like the idea of like basically me being able to get you some added benefit from this project, right? Because I think we could put this together, get a little bit of a better edit, get some credits on there, and then next year submit it to some film festivals, right? And then you could have a film festival credit. Having said that, I'm not going to force you to do that. If you don't want your piece in there, just send me an email, let me know. If you're like, I don't like that one, send me an email, let me know. The final edit I will do is with the revisions in the revision folder, so I know that you probably are still wanting to make some changes to some stuff. That's completely cool. Maybe you already have and just haven't put them in the revisions folder yet. So we'll continue to revise this throughout the semester, but I like the idea of between this and your final, you having two pieces that you could point to on the internet as production work, right? Or point to in the industry just in general as production work. So, seem okay to you? Any comments on this? It's crazy. I'd like to make it a little more exciting. Like I feel like it gets probably a little less entertaining to you than it is to people who haven't seen it before, because you already have seen all of these animations one at a time. I think somebody seeing it for the first time might take it. They might find it more entertaining because they're getting introduced to a new character throughout it. Couple of things to look at in here: consistency of size. I think there's some of them that maybe need a few more keyframes for in-betweens, because some of them are a little poppier than others. So look at that. If you're wanting to do that in a revision, I think it would really make for a little bit more of a consistent piece. But what I need for sure is in this next video. So basically it's the same video again, but I put text in each of the scenes that needed a revision for some reason. This needs a different export, or what my issue was, right? I'll put these up on the network as well, but we'll go ahead and watch through once here so you can kind of see the issues with it. So. So again, all of those notes were just the technical issues, not necessarily the like animation improvement notes, right? So I'll probably still get you a video with some feedback on each of those. But if you'd like to chat with me, I see a couple of them that I'm like, oh, we could push this, or we could add a few more breakdowns here, or, and I'm sure a lot of you are already kind of implementing that from the feedback. So something else to look at, like, I'll put the video up on the network. Some scenes, like the character will be like full frame, and then in others maybe a little too close. Like Tracy, I think one of yours, like the head's kind of getting trimmed off a little bit. So you may be able to just scale that down a little bit so it's a little bit more in frame. So Brant, like yours is a little on the small side, maybe scale that up a little bit. And then we just get a little bit more of a consistent size and style of characters. So anyway, I think it can be fun. I will definitely make it a little more, not flashy, but a little bit more entertaining. Because one of the things we can do with this is add effects on top of that. Obviously, the very cheesy like lightning effect was intentionally cheesy, but something that's going to give it a little bit more like of a club feeling or whatever. And we could also have that color card that's in the background progressively get more dynamic. Right, like if everybody has the same, is on the same background, then we can make some changes to that. So that's something I'd like to do, is just sort of like a little bonus to help me put that together. Again, if you're not interested in participating in that, send me an email to let me know, and I'll fix that on the edit. Cool. So that was a lot to go over kind of quickly. What I'd like to do, take a little like 10-minute break, stretch your legs. When we come back, I'm going to show you two interesting tricks, and we're going to talk about what's kind of coming up for this week, like what we're planning on doing, what you should kind of be, how you should kind of plan out the rest of your week in order to, get through it pretty smoothly. And then again, a lot of these next few days are going to be me showing you like bags of tricks of things that you can tinker with. But know that one of our biggest projects we're coming up on this week is going to be a lip sync piece where your character's going to be doing some talking. So that's kind of the biggest chunk of it. The rest of it's like the tips and tricks. So let's go ahead and take a break. It's 3:15. Let's say be back here about 3:25. We'll pick it up on the rest of it. And I'll go ahead and put these edits up in the resources folder.
It's turning on, but it's not like display.
There's literally see if that makes sense. You have to restart some stuff. There it goes. I'm guessing the copy is going to work with pin. Like your pin is going to, yeah, it's going to be on the wrong screen. So you have to set that to your primary monitor. check it. I can open up the Premiere file. Maybe it was something on my end. For some reason I couldn't get it to.
Hey, Greg, maybe I'll do this. Send these new exports to just what's it called?
Yeah, there should be a revisions folder in there. Let me try this one more time. Pig dance. Maybe I missed it last time somehow. It's not pig dance.
There's a changing sequence for energy right there. So actually, it's like, yeah, it's one, two, three. It's going. There's always a detail fixes. Yeah. Actually, after a report, actually, kind of keep bolts down. You guys use the bolts but I didn't get time to do that. And so you go like spin out a revolver also on max loading bolts max.
Okay, I think everybody's back. Okay. So we'll turn down the lights just a little bit. So what can go with so I'm going to go over something else, a couple of little things, but Robert had a question, so I'm going to try to see if I can come up with ways to show you how to do that, like overlapping action on the cape. I think it really just depends on how your mind works best, right? So the biggest thing you want to be able to do is sort of track this ripple that happens through the cape, right? So if I'm gonna go ahead and my ghosting here just so we can kind of see this, right? Right now, if I'm looking at this, I'm going to choose a different pen. I'm on texture 3. That's cool. We have a point here, right? We have a point here. Right? And in the process of this transition happening, we also have like a little bit of a curve here and a curve here, like the sort of the highest points and lowest points of each of those, right? And really what you want it to feel like is you want to feel like this sine wave, like this peak is moving across this way, and this peak is moving across this way, right? Or vice versa. I guess we could do it the other direction, like this way and this way, right? And so that's really what we're trying to make it feel like is happening. And so you could do that any way that you want, but what I usually do is I go down here and I just sort of subdivide that, right? Get F5 to there, get a new drawing here. And I just try to make the opposite of this, right? So that peak is there, this peak is here, this curve is here, this curve is here, right? And so really just in this process of getting from A to B, I just have to be able to transition those things in that way. So I could get my curve like this, right? Kind of go halfway in between those two. Halfway in between those two, and sort of get the way that flow looks like it's happening. I'm going to get in this one too. Right. So really what I'm wanting is I eventually want this peak to be over here, right? So I want it to look like it's kind of traveling down this way, right? So if I go halfway between those two, I could just kind of get that. I can put that peak, sorry, I need a new empty layer. So put that peak in between. Now the peak that I want to be right here actually hasn't started yet, so I'll put it right there. Right. Oh yeah, in case anybody forgot, I'm sharing the WebEx thing too, so so you can always hop on and watch in real time. And of course, this point is going to continue to kind of either travel back to here or vice versa. I kind of overshoot a little bit more. I'm going to go ahead and have it something like this. And so what I want to end up with that curve is something like this. Maybe something like this. Is that right? Let's see. I'm going the wrong way there. Take this up just a little bit higher. Something like that, right? So I know it's a pretty messy curve, but then we just kind of keep re-subdividing at another point here. It's almost there. No, wrong way. Here. And earlier when we were here, again, same thing there. There. And so what we're going to end up with now is sort of this slow, like, ripple down. Of course, that one, I think that's a little bit too big of a jump. I need to work on that one a little bit more, or just put another breakdown in there. There. So, I'm trying to get to let's see what that feels like. So again, however many you need to do that, like you can do it. I'm just kind of using this to figure out my like flow line. Um, you could like, there's a lot of different ways you could break this up. You could also add, break this up into sort of like segments. If you like thinking in like that pendulum manner, like we could do it as um, these blocks, right? That are connected together. Maybe not that big. These blocks that are connected together, and just think about how they would overlap to get back to this position again, right? And so we can just step by step go through there and break that up. So I know it's not like unless I sat here and just animated the full thing, it would be kind of hard to explain. But the whole point is to get that feeling like a wave is going through the bottom of it. And so there's other little cheats that you could do to figure that out as well. And this may be a little bit more intuitive way of doing that. So I'm going to turn off this layer. Let's go ahead and draw that sine wave again on a new layer. All right. Close. All right, something like that. Well, we can cheat on this a little bit if we wanted to. I could hit F5, right? And I could go ahead and animate that sine layer to kind of give us an idea of what we want that ripple to do. Right? So if I started it down here, make this whole thing smaller. So if it starts something like this, we could just over time progress this forward until we're kind of back to the same shape again, right? And so now we can sort of see the wave that we're wanting to go through it, right? Let me hide this other one so you can't see it as well. So if I F5, you can kind of see that ripple you want to go through it, and we could draw that every frame now, right? I could go to here and back on my cape layer, new shape, brush, back here to texture 3 again, and sort of draw out that new shape in texture 3. I have a brush a little bit bigger than that, so a little bit more this. New layer. See my whole cape. So it starts here. That. There. And then this one, where I want it to loop, is just that same drawing again. Control C, Control V. So now if I hide that guide layer that I had, I'll be able to see sort of the ripple that happens through there now. And I just have to draw the rest of the cape and how that would react to that. So I'm probably going to add that later, but that's just 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That's 5 drawings that I could get this repeating cape pattern. And so I'm probably going to do that as an extra element here in just a little bit. In the meantime, I'm going to delete these other layers because I want to talk about all of this stuff I have going on in the background. I played around just a little bit with, I'll go ahead and leave that one. I played around just a little bit with some drawings, right? And so I'll go ahead and hide my cape just for now. We'll look at it. You may not be able to see it very well, but we still have our guide box that is in there, right? But this is just 5 layers of different things, right? In fact, the amount of time it took me to make this was the amount of time I gave you to put the files in the folder for the critique just now. So I just want to break these apart. These are very rough illustrations just to show you the idea. But we have this character figure in the in the front here, okay? Kind of going to go with like a shadowy, like Red Riding Hood thing going on, right? We have the Grouf, which is actually supposed to be the ground. There we go, because I can't, right? And the ground layer is just sort of this extra brown layer that's on top here, right? And then we have trees 1, which is this foreground layer of trees. We basically just have 3 different layers of trees, and I'll show them to you sort of building up one at a time. So this is our first layer of trees, which is the closest layer, right? The next layer is actually the same exact trees. I just duplicated them, stretched them, kind of made them a little thinner to look a little further away, right? And then the next layer, and I made them a little darker. And then the next layer is yet again sort of stretched them, made them taller, thinner, so they look like they're a little further away. So hopefully what that's giving us is a little bit of depth, or at least implied depth, in this shot, right? Okay, so this is going to get difficult just because we don't always have a ton of screen real estate here. Let me try to see if I can break this up so you can see it a little bit better. I'm going to make another tab. So right now we have our camera tab, and this just means this is what we are going to see coming out of the right node, right? Like what the display node, the right node. It's just displaying what we're seeing through our camera, right? Up until this point, you've actually not been able to physically change the camera in any way. It's kind of just like we by default have a camera, right? Now, we've been moving things in our scene side to side, up and down, right? That's 2 different directions or 2 different dimensions, right? And I know this is 2D animation, but Toon Boom has a little bit of an option for 3D. In fact, you can import models from Maya into Toon Boom as well. Still render them through Maya. I think it only uses like the Maya software renderer or whatever. But still have them implemented as 3D objects in the scene, right? So to be able to see that a little bit better, we need to be able to see in perspective. By default, our camera view is just 2 dimensions. It's not an orthographic view, but it's just a flat view. We're always going to be looking at it from the side, right? So I'm going to add a new camera down here in this panel, or not a new camera, but a new window, and it's just this perspective mode. And when you first open it, it looks the same, except for if you notice, there's a little bit of a 3D grid here on the bottom, right? You all see that? Let me kind of make this a little bit bigger so you can see it. But this is where this gets really interesting, is if I hold Control and Alt at the same time, you see I get this hand, whereas like if I just hit space, I get a hand too, I can pan around, right? We've been seeing that. If I hold Control and Alt at the same time, we get that hand, and I can tumble. And you'll start to see the actual 3D elements of this, right? Those 2D drawings we have actually exist in this 3D space, okay? The interesting thing about all of that is that we can kind of move them around in that 3D space as well, right? So I can rotate these in 3 dimensions. Right now that's not working in any meaningful way, so I'm not going to do that much more, right? But what I think is kind of cool about this is that means I can grab these different layers, right? Like I currently have my color card here, right? And you'll see that it's like the layer that's like kind of far back there, right? Control Alt, it's kind of got this gap between my color card and my foreground elements, right? I can scoot that back even further if I wanted to. The way I do that is I go to my layer properties, right? And I guess I haven't actually tried this with the color card. So is it depth that makes it go back further? No, it's offset Z. So this offset Z, it says 12B, which really means 12 back. You can type that, or you can type negative 12, and that will send it to the back. Actually, my negative 12, doesn't work. Okay, maybe not. Negative 16, there we go. So that sends it 16 units back, right? So I can send it really far back or further back. It doesn't really matter. I'm just trying to give myself a little bit of extra space. I'm going to go ahead and do maybe like 30. Push it way back there. That way I got a little bit of space in between here to work with, right? Because what I would also like to do is push each of my tree layers back a little bit, right? So I can go trees 3, which is this one here, right? And I could go to my transformations, and again, it's my Z axis. We've been moving stuff in X and Y, but now we can move stuff in Z. So I'll make this maybe negative 20. And when I scoot that back, because it is moving further away, it got smaller, right? So I can also scale that up if I wanted to. Let's see, our scale right now is 1 and 1. I think if I did scale on fields, what's I do? Anyway, I can scale this up to like, let's do instead 2 and 2, right? Maybe even a little bit bigger, maybe 2.5 and 2.5. I also think that, I thought that this would allow me to scale them too, but apparently not. And so now it's a little bigger back there, and I can kind of do this with each of my layers. Again, push it back in Z. How far back did I push that one? So that was it 20, I think? So for transformations, yeah, 20. I'll go ahead and do this one 10, and then the next one 5. So negative 10. Scoot it back a little bit. Oh, okay. It's giving me this box to where I can resize it kind of quickly too. That's helpful. And of course, my trees 1, I'll just push that back negative 5. So I can do that. Now, why this is so it didn't really make that much of a difference in my illustration, right? Or in my final drawing. It still pretty much looks the same. It just means that we have some stuff happening in depth here, right? And what I want is I want a 3D camera that I can move around in this scene to imply some of that depth, right? So here's where this is going to, I'm going to actually hide my color card. I think it's making it harder to see my frame. We can always turn it back on here in a minute, right? There we go. So now you can kind of see that frame in there a little bit better. So what I need now is a camera, right? Interestingly, the camera doesn't have to be hooked to anything in our node editor, but I'm going to go ahead and add a node view here, right? Again, organize everything so I can see it. Okay. And I'm going to, what is that? I think I needed that, whatever it is. So in our node library, you'll see this option for camera right here, right? Or I can right click and go to insert, and then I guess this is under favorites. I think it's under a couple of other places too, but camera, right? So I'm just going to drag me a camera in here. And you see that when I dropped it in here, my view turned to this purple shade. In fact, if I deselect it, it's not purple anymore, but if I select my camera, you can see the area I have highlighted. And now if I move, like you see how my cursor is like this little double arrow thing? If I move, you'll start to see the depth in those trees. So do you see that? Like I can get closer and as I get closer, there's some parallax happening there. To show this a little bit better, if I go to my layer view and choose to move on like my X and Y, if I crank that number up and down, I can, let me do this with some animation so you can see it a little bit better. I guess I can't really do that, can I? I'll have to show you how to do that here in just a second. But you'll see that as I do that, like the trees in the foreground are moving faster, are moving faster than the trees in the background, right? So what I want to do is to be able to animate this kind of on the fly. Right now, I'm going to go ahead and change these numbers here from 12F back to 0, and from that back to 0. I don't know, maybe I do need to pull it away. That's apparently not where I need to be. Let's undo that. Okay, so I may just go ahead and leave my camera x-axis at 0. So the interesting thing is I can't really move this camera. I can't just grab in here and move it. Oh, actually, apparently I can. So apparently that works. But I can't. Oh, I guess this worked. Never mind. I was confused about how this was going to work. This works fine. So if I go to my move tool, I can move my camera side to side. If I go to my, I think it's my scale tool, I can push my camera forward and back, right? So these two tools here will allow me to animate stuff a little more clearly, right? So let's say I want to start here, right? I'm using my scroll to get a little closer, right? I want my camera to start here, and then let's go out here quite a ways. Let's go out here to like 60, frame 60, right? And by the end of that, I just hit F6 to get a keyframe at the beginning here. So by the end of these 60 frames, maybe even go a little longer, like 90 frames. So by the end of these 90 frames, I want my camera just to be in a different place. So my move tool, move it across this way. I think if you hold shift, it will stay kind of flat. So I can move this over to here, right? And if I wanted to, I could also move it in a little closer or a little further away, either one. So I could do something like this. And down here on this end, again, I'm just going to hit F6. And so what I have now should be, no, it is not. Why is it not? Okay, that's what I thought. It was too good to be true. Let's go ahead and delete these keyframes here because I am able to move it, but apparently those are not things I'm able to set keyframes on. So what I can do though is I can put a controller on this. So I think a peg will work. I also think a transform node will work, but let's go ahead and try a peg. I'm gonna grab my camera and hit Control P for a peg. And so now this is a transform node on that. So I can set those same keys on that instead, right? So I can hit F6 here. This is where I want to start. I'm going to actually pull my camera over a little bit and maybe zoom my camera back a little bit. So since I have this camera peg, I can zoom it out by separating out my channels and then pulling back in the Z a little bit. So I can move my Z to, let's try 1. Yeah, it pulls it back a little bit. Maybe even 2, right? And again, can move it here. You can also still move it with these numbers if you want to, but there we go. So that's that. If I want to keyframe this, I may. What is that? Why did I do that? Okay, that'll work. F6. So again, go to the end. Let's try this again. Move it over to here. Kind of doing this backwards again. And zooming in a little bit. There. hopefully what I have now, it's not keeping that. All right, I think I have to set a keyframe on it with this. So click that button right there. Then tag selected. Ah, that was the problem. Oh, I bet I have to actually move this in my perspective view. I do, my bad. There we go. So again, let's tumble around here. Move this camera in. So that's the end point. Start point. There we go. That's working. So, sorry about that. So what I actually had needed to do was this enable 3D right here. Apparently I hadn't checked that, and that allows me to move it in the perspective view. And so now I can move my camera closer, further away. You can see elements of my ground and stuff are being cropped there. I'm not sure if that's really something that matters that much. I can kind of lower my camera if I need to, or I can lower the background elements. But that means that when we go to render this, we're going to get all of that parallax built into it. So, we will get all of those trees moving at different speeds, all of that stuff. So now, of course, we could fake this just by scaling each of those one layer at a time. But this is actually like 3D. So one of the other cool things about this is that means I can make a 2D element and rotate it in 3D, right? Like if I wanted this to not be, let's try it with our ground plane, see if that works better. It may or may not. So this is my ground plane here, right? And it's still a 3D object, or a 2D object, but I can move it up and down in 3D, right? And also sort of position this a little bit better. So let's position it here, right? And maybe even scale that a little bit. Stretch it out. Because one of the elements you can do with this is to rotate this in 3D to get a better result out of it. I don't like that. Instead, let's actually stretch it this way. Let's That makes more sense, right? So if I wanted to get a little bit of depth on that ground, I could go in here to my rotate mode, and right now, again, I'm only able to rotate on the side to side, but if I hit enable 3D, I get 3 axes of depth. And so this is actually really kind of cool. Let me zoom in here so you can see it. As I rotate it like this, it's going to get closer or further away from us, right? So we can get something a little bit more like this. Move it over just a little bit more. So if you want your characters to be on like a tile floor or something like that, you can draw that tile in 2 dimensions and still get a little bit of depth in there, right? And like as we move, we'll see a little bit of the depth of that ground, right? So I just wanted to show you this as a way of getting some relatively simple depth in your scene, right? And if I go ahead and render this out, hopefully we'll get kind of a neat effect to this. So file, save as, we'll call this, have I done this? No. File, save. So this one's week 3, right? I can go to File, Export, Render Right Node, okay, create a preview out of that. And as I create this preview, hopefully it'll make the movie as well. So let's go back to faculty. No. Marlowe, Greg in class. It's going to take it a minute to finish rendering it. Week 3, frames. Oh. So this is worth pointing out. This is rendering these really slowly, right? When you were just drawing after drawing, like one drawing, next drawing, that's not a lot for the computer to calculate, right? Now I've asked this thing to render this with depth. We got a little bit of like not shadows, like a transparency going on, just because I used a little bit more of a stylized brush, right? And so with all of these things, I'm getting, it's taking my render time a lot slower, right? Like it's on render of frame 40. I know some of you are used to longer render times. Like this is not going to be like Maya render times where you wait like sometimes 30 hours for a render. I've waited probably up to 30 minutes for a render out of Toon Moon, but it's gonna do pretty well. I want to show you something too, because I took my run cycle from the other day. So after this is finished, I'll show you this. I took my run cycle the other day and I just started playing in the node view. I started like, let's look at some stuff that I can do to take this flat drawing that I already have and make some changes to it. Save often, Control S or whatever. Whenever I hear thunder. My mother-in-law was without power for like 2 days the other day. So I wanted to show you, I don't think we have enough time to go over too much of this in detail, but this is a lot of what we're going to layer in next class period. I want to show you just what playing in the node view, what I can add to it. So really quickly, we'll look at this, like the final render of this. Doesn't it make me a video too? Apparently not. There we go. So again, very subtle, but allows you to get a lot of depth without having to redraw all of that stuff, or without having to try to like pretend that that parallax is there. Right? So think of little things like you have a camera you want to push through the grass, and you want those like blades of grass coming by you, or maybe your character is just jumping along rooftops on a cityscape, and you want it to look like the buildings in the distance are moving a little slower than the buildings in the foreground, right? That added on with that little cape animation I have, or that I'm going to work on, can pretty much create an entire animation, right? Like that scene is just like Red's looking into the woods, and she's like, she knows there's wolves there, but she's got to get to Grandma's house, right? Like again, these are sloppy animations, or sloppy illustrations. The illustration is something I can edit all the way up to render time, right? And so this is just a nice way of getting some of that like faking a little 3D. It's not really fake, it's actual 3D, but adding that like 3D element or that depth element to your draw or to your animation. So while we are on that subject, you all had seen the run animation I did the other day. I just, again, took a little bit of extra time, did some tweaks to some stuff, and ended up with this, which has a lot of other things going on in it. So I put some speed lines in the background. That's actually just a particle effect that is already built into Toon Boom. It's a rain effect. I took the rain and I turned it sideways, basically, is what I did. And then I lowered the opacity on it to make it a little bit more like some speed lines, put it behind the ground. Right? Some of the other things, though, is this shadow down here. And that's a little more complicated than you might think. Right? I can break this down in a lot more detail, but basically what this is you know how all of that stuff pipes into the composite node? I took all of the things that go into the composite node, and I broke them off and ran them into another node that was just called shadow. And then I turned that shadow up really dark to where basically I just had a silhouetted version of my character, a black version of my character, right? And then I flipped that upside down, skewed it, and turned down the opacity. Right? So I could make changes to my character's animation, and it would update in the shadow as well. Right? So there's a lot of reasons, even though the node editor can be kind of like, it's a pain in the butt, there's a lot of reasons to use it, right? And that's one of the things I'm wanting to go over next class period. Like right now, my character, like if I wanted to draw a blink, I would feel like I would need to draw frame by frame of the eyelids closing. There's actually a really simple way that I can make my character's eye blink without actually having to draw anything. It's like there's just some weird nodes, and what that means is you don't have to use them. Like you could draw every frame of the blink if you wanted to. But knowing they're there means little bits at a time, you'll start to implement some of them into the ways you work. And I want to show you a few of those things, even if you don't decide to use them this class, right? I want to show you that they're there, because eventually, 6 months down the road, you'll be like, I need to do this thing. Hey, wait, I remember that mask thing that Marlo was talking about. Let me try that. So I'm going to shut up here in a second. What I do need from you, though, is I need you to make some decisions tonight. One of the animations we're going to be doing is a lip sync. Right? We're going to take an audio clip and we're going to animate our character saying that audio clip. You are welcome to use any of the characters you've already created in this class. They will need a mouth. Or you're welcome to create your own character. We're going to do this animation from chest up. Okay? So if you've already designed your character, you want to draw them in a different pose or whatever, that's fine. You can do a new rig for it, but basically we're going to break up your character into chest, neck, head, and then the facial features. And I'm going to show you how to sort of swap those in and out in order to make our character look like they're talking. To give you an idea of this, I'll show you something from one of the previous classes. Anybody watch Grace and Frankie? It's a Netflix show. You should watch it. It's funny. Anyway, this is an example of like a little test I did from that show class.
This feels like a jar of treats for a dog. This feels like a jar of treats for a dog. This feels like a jar of treats for a dog. This feels like a jar of treats for a dog.
So making the character and doing all the lip sync took me about an hour, like from scratch. And then I realized, I'm not crazy about that audio clip. I'm just going to reanimate another clip with a different audio clip.
Saul lied to me about Kenny Loggins. Saul lied to me about Kenny Loggins.
That one took about 10 minutes. Okay, so like once we get this set up for lip sync, that's how you're able to get a minute of animation in 6 hours done, right? And so I'm going to show you a lot of that. Once you get it set up, it actually goes relatively quickly. Depending on how much time I have to prep for it, we may even use this character because it's already kind of set up for it. I'd like to be able to show you how to do one from scratch, but you can kind of see from the rig the parts that are broken up. I have my brows in a separate piece. I have my mouth in a separate piece. I have the head and the hair separate, the neck and the shoulders. But this is what you're going to be aiming for. If you want to show a little bit more of the torso so you can do hand gestures, you're welcome to, but you're not required to. This is one of the things that's going to be, we're going to be working on next class period, or next few class periods. So we probably aren't going to, I don't know, we'll see how next class period goes. We may get into lip syncing next class period, but what you need to do is be finding some audio clips. A couple of different ways of ripping those. But if you can just find examples of them and bring them in, one of the easiest ways is what I'm using to record the lectures in here, which is OBS. It's open broadcast software, I think is what it's called. It's a free software you can download and you can record your screen. After you've recorded your screen, it'll pick up the audio from what you're playing, and then you can just take that into Premiere or whatever and strip the audio out of it. If you can find something on a YouTube video from like your favorite TV show or whatever, sometimes there's like audio downloaders for YouTube that are,
YouTube to MP3.
yeah, stuff like that, where you can just strip out an MP3.
However,
Yeah, so yeah, they do kind of go lower quality and stuff. There's ways we can get it out of there. If you have like a DVD that you want to get it off of, that's cool too. Again, I don't think we'll jump right into using that. I'd like to go over next class period. Sort of what our target is for the three different animations. Yes?
are there any limits to what the audio can and cannot say?
Not for me. I would prefer, no, I'm not prefer. Let's make it not, obviously like, no hate speech, nothing, but if it has some profanity or cursing in it, I'm not opposed to it. Recognize that Nickelodeon may be though, and so if you're applying to them,
Okay.
you got to keep that in mind.
Counter proposal. I find an audio clip, use it for this project and possibly future reels, still also present one with profanity to this class.
Yeah, you're welcome to use whatever you want to. I'm not gonna be like, you said the S word, F. Y'all are adults. Do what you want to do. I will say, usually you get the most out of an audio clip if you can find one that is completely understandable to the audience with no context at all, right? Like the Saul lied to me about Kenny Loggins. You have no idea what that means, right? Like in the show, it's hilarious. To you, you're like, what? Find something that has context, and it usually is more powerful if there's a change of emotion. If your character goes from like confused to outraged, and of course everybody likes a good joke. So sitcoms, stuff like The Office, Parks and Rec, they have a lot of good clips. The Mindy Project, like Mindy Kaling is hilarious. Like, she has a lot of really good one-liners. Yes. Under 10 seconds. So let's say over 5, under 10. Okay, so 5, 7, 8, 9, 10, something like that. If it's something you're super, super passionate about, I will consider a second or two above that, but I would say just for your own sanity, aim a little on the smaller side because there's a couple other things we're going to be doing this week too. So, all right. Any other questions? All right. So what I am planning on doing is doing some lip sync in front of the class, but I want to give you next class period a little bit of time to be getting stuff ready for that, getting your character prepped for it so you can kind of follow along if you want to. You're also going to need headphones. So it's like 9 or 12 audio clips all blaring at the same time. It's going to get very, yeah. So bring some earbuds or something like that. And yeah. All right, cool. Thank you. Have a good day.
I already have the two that I'm gonna do in my head already.
I save clips, just like if I see a TV show, I'll make a note to myself on what episode that is, and then periodically I'll just go capture them.
What if the character is very vague?
That's all right.
What if the character is a talking burger? You know,
I'm completely okay with that, but like,
you know, like having a burger imitated talking would be a lot easier than like moving a mouse.
it would be, but keep in mind, how does a burger make the F sound? Forever. So,
Wait, how do you get out of those activities?
there's a couple of websites that are YouTube burgers, like most people use that for, like pirating music and stuff like that. But for something like this, if you're covering it very easily, you just use something like that.
So YouTube audio reviews?
Yeah, just search for something like